Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on wherever it is that you're calling from today. My name is Dave Babst. I'm a Vice President of Business Development at AnswerLab. Wanted to welcome you to today's webcast and presentation, first and foremost. I'm going to provide some brief introductions to both AnswerLab and to today's featured speaker, and then we'll get into the substance of the actual dialogue and discussion. So first, just a bit about AnswerLab. For those of you who may not be as familiar with us as a firm, AnswerLab delivers insights and advice that shape exceptional digital experiences. Our proprietary solutions and objective user experience experts enable the world's leading brands to dramatically improve marketing effectiveness and product performance. Today, AnswerLab is the leading and largest independent research firm focused exclusively on user experience research. We were founded in San Francisco in 2004, have offices today in New York. We come recommended by the likes of Forrester, are regularly published in places like UX Magazine and Quirks, and we also actively partner with the likes of some of our strategic clients like Google on providing thought leadership in the marketplace around areas like mobile. Our belief is that as a certified woman-owned business, that diversity really breeds and heightens our ability to relate to users and also bring richer perspectives and insights to our clients as well. Enough about us. I'll move forward and talk about today's featured speaker. Ryan Haupt is a principal UX researcher at AnswerLab and a fellow colleague. Ryan brings with him over 12 years of expertise in quantitative and qualitative methods of research across both B2C and B2B markets. Notably, Ryan leads some of the research engagements with some of our leading clients while also providing leadership and oversight over our quantitative benchmarking and monitoring solution called UX Impact. Ryan is a resident expert on all things quant in the AnswerLab halls, and I'm going to turn things over to Ryan to talk about UX measurement and our perspective on it.
All right, thanks, Dave. Hi, everyone. As Dave said, my name is Ryan Haupt, and thank you for joining me today, and I hope you're all having a wonderful day. My presentation here should last roughly 45 minutes, and to begin with, I'm going to touch on why UX measurements are important. This will be a quick discussion, and then I'll move on to the more meat of the presentation, which we'll be discussing the 4 steps to UX measurement success. With that, we'll be addressing 5 key elements of the UX measurement program. We'll be discussing what and when to measure, as well as how to gain team and stakeholder support. So why UX measurements are important? I may be preaching to the choir with this audience, but it's important to remind ourselves why UX measurements are important. There are 4 main reasons as I see them. The first one is to take action by understanding your data. And what this means is that with UX measurements, the goal here is to get measurements that are more actionable. As we'll talk about later, there's a world of data out there, and UX measurements are all about getting actionable data. For example, if time on site goes up, is it because people love your site and are consuming your great content, or is it because they're lost and frustrated looking for the right answer? UX measurements help you understand the answer to that question. The next one is to course correct sooner. By testing early and often, you're able to find issues before they significantly impact your bottom line. And my little quote here is: had the captain of the Titanic had better measurement tools, it's possible that they could have turned that ship sooner to avoid the iceberg. So the idea behind this is you're getting early reads on how people are feeling about your site, and you can make changes and make better, more informed business decisions because of that. The next one is to demonstrate value. We've all been there when our clients or our bosses want to know what impact their development investment is having on their bottom line. UX measurements help to provide that crucial link between investment and business outcomes. And finally, you have proactively respond to market changes. We all know that the markets are always changing. And an example of this would be smartwatches, right? Smartwatches introduced within the last couple of years, I would say, and we can all probably agree that the adoption has been a bit shaky for smartwatches. But by using UX measurements, organizations could help better define what their smartwatch offering is going to be, and make those changes that are needed in an ever-changing market. So now that we've reviewed some of the benefits of having a UX measurement program, I'll move on to the 4 steps to UX measurement success. The first of which is to define 5 elements or considerations of UX measurement programs. These are great questions to keep in mind whether you're new to UX measurements or if you've already have a program in place. You can use these to think about how it applies to your program. But before we get started, it's important to first understand that there's really no right or wrong answer. There could be a wrong answer here, but hopefully this webinar will help you from going down that wrong path. And so keep in mind that every industry is different, every company is different, and every measurement program is going to be different. In all my years of conducting and creating quantitative measurement programs, I've never had 2 identical programs. But what we're presenting here are some fundamental elements that you should be considering for your UX measurement program. In the end, what's going to dictate this is your business needs. These elements that we'll be discussing provide some guidelines and considerations for how to set up and measure the program that's best for you and your situation. So the idea here is that by using these fundamental elements, you'll be allowed to build a house with a strong foundation, or something much larger and more intricate, like this Gothic and modern style building in Chicago. So what are the 5 key elements of UX measurement program? These include aligning UX measurements with business goals, identifying cross-platform experiences, benchmarking and monitoring key metrics, preparing to ask what, how many, and why, and understanding how UX metrics connect to other business data. Now I'm going to go deep dive into each of these 5 elements. So looking at the first one is with aligning metrics to your business goals. The first step here is really taking a step back and understanding how your business, or what's important to your business as a whole, right? And these are some great questions to ask when you're thinking about those business goals, because in the end, you want to first define those business goals and then come up with metrics that align with those business goals. So things like what are the business decisions being made? What impact do they have on brand? Is it measurable? Can you improve over time? How important is this product or service? And who should measure its success? Is it going to be you? Do you need to outsource that to a third party? Those are all key questions that you want to look at. For example, if you're a higher education website, you're most concerned with increasing requests for information. But if you're a retailer, you may want to increase your shopping cart size or purchase frequency. So understanding what business outcomes your company is trying to achieve is critical in picking the correct metrics. In these examples, you might ask users in your program their likelihood to request information in the next 3 months, or it might be something like likelihood to use the site to make their next purchase. So every site is going to have something different, or every company is going to have something different, and it really depends on what their business goals are. The next step is to define success. So you've come up with some metrics that align with your business goals, and then you have to make sure that they're actionable, make sure that they're realistic, be specific in your measurements. And those first 3, I think, are the most important here, right? Because in the end, the goal of any UX metric program is to have actionable data. So you really have to put your eye to that and determine, is what I'm going after navigation, or is it content? those are some elements that we have leverage on as site developers and site owners. So we want to drive to what are those things that we can change and as they align to our business goals. You also want to remember that stability is success in some cases, right? I've been in some situations where people will comment and be worried that their overall positive ratings are going from a 90% to an 85%. And while you have to take that step back and say, well, geez, it hasn't changed that much. You significantly test it and all that to make sure, but you look at that and you say, in the broader picture, we're still doing okay, right? So you have to remember that sometimes you don't need to have high increase in ratings in order to be successful. So those are the things that you need to be thinking about when you're defining your goals and aligning those to your UX metrics. The other thing that you want to keep in mind that when you're defining those business goals, really broad, high-level business goals, such as driving more revenue or increasing the customer base, those are really hard to translate into UX measurements. So what you want to do is, when you're defining those goals, make them more granular. And my examples here, drive 20% more conversion in the product line in the next 12 months. You're introducing a percentage, you're saying it's conversion that you care about, and you're giving it a time frame. So it's much more specific than, hey, we just want to drive more revenue across the board. Because now you have things you can work with, right? And remember that the definitions of success can evolve over time, right? So this is another point that I wanted to make here, is that the 12-month period or the 24-month period that you see in some of these, it will depend on what you're measuring, as well as the idea that you have to continually go back and reassess what you're defining as success to make sure that you're still in alignment with those business goals. And sometimes your business goals will change over time too, so you need to reassess that. So any program, you're not just doing this once in the program, you're going to be doing it at key stages throughout. Okay, the second element here is to identify cross-platform experiences. Your program will also must be able to measure the impact of these UX changes across devices and platforms. In today's world, people are using all kinds of devices, and they're jumping back and forth from phones to tablets to desktops. And there's multiple ways in which they can engage with your business. So in some cases, people are picking whichever device is most convenient to them. In other cases, their experience might be slightly better or more appropriate for a specific device. An example of this might be for maps, right? If you sit down at your computer and you're looking at maps, it's probably going to be a different reason than when you're on your phone, right? When you're on your phone, you're on the go, and it has a little bit different needs there. And so to keep in mind that as this number 2 element is that you need to be able to measure these programs across all of your devices and platforms. The third element is to benchmark and monitor key metrics. So benchmarking is very important because without it, you won't have anything meaningful to base your findings on. You need to first measure to create that reference point at one or various points of your product development lifecycle. Like the mile markers on this road you see here, it helps you figure out where you are currently so that in the future you can determine how far you've come. We have a major shipping client who created a benchmarking program that looked at the current state of their website. We used both quantitative and qualitative studies to determine how their users from around the world feel about their site. We also looked at how their current site designs compared to rough alternative designs. And we were able to determine that the newer designs were more well received than their current offering. The client is now building out much more robust prototypes based on that winning design from last year. And we'll be able to compare the results of the new prototype with the older prototype that we benchmarked last year. to ensure that they're still moving in the right direction. Because you know how it is with prototypes. You create something here, you tweak it here and there, and you want to retest it to make sure that you're still going in that right direction. So by benchmarking it beforehand, making the changes, and then retesting it after, we're able to give that client, our customer, confidence that they need to eventually go live with the best and most user-centric design that they can. The fourth element is to prepare to ask yourself what, how many, and why. The point of this element is to determine which questions will answer your business owner's key questions. Then you can align those questions with the UX methods and approaches that you have available. So we do a quantitative and qualitative research, so we have all of these at our disposal. And an example of this is that you plan to learn what users are doing and how many of them are doing it with quantitative approaches. That will help you to gauge the scope of any of your issues. But quantitative studies in themselves, they can't answer all the questions. So be prepared to use these other methods and to understand why customers are behaving the way they are so you can learn what to do about it. Be prepared to observe and interview users directly with qualitative research approaches, such as in-depth interviews, lab-based studies, and ethnographies. Using a variety of UX methods allow you to more clearly answer your business owner's key questions. And ultimately, a good UX measurement program will also allow you to understand the impact those issues that you uncover have on your business goals. And finally, the fifth element here is to understand how UX metrics connect to other business data. There's a world of data out there that they're at your fingertips, right? From business intelligence to third-party analytics to your own site and mobile data. All of these data sources show you when you're having problems with your digital performance. These tools give you very detailed information about what happened. They pinpoint areas of concern like abandoned shopping carts or poor adoption. But knowing there's a problem is only half the battle. Oftentimes, those analytics can't provide direction for fixing the problems they reveal. You need the benefit of user context to answer the underlying question of why is it doing what it's doing. So as UX researchers, it's important to understand how your UX measures are connected and interrelated to the other sources of business data. For example, it might be that your UX measurement program is showing customers are perceiving your site speed as very slow. You can proactively look at your site's technical performance metrics to determine if you've had an actual slowdown. If there's no slowdown, it's possible the site was designed in a way that's leading people to feel they're taking longer to complete a task than they normally would. And I've actually seen this exact thing happen at a telecommunication company. The UX measurements were indicating people were perceiving their site as being very slow. So we went and linked the perceived performance to the actual performance and found that there was nothing technically out of the ordinary for them. So we kept digging further into what people are saying and how they're feeling about the site. And what we learned is that the site in certain areas had gone through a redesign. And that redesign was largely taking content that was text-based and making it video-based. And so people were coming there looking for a quick answer to a problem, and they were feeling that they still needed to go through these videos in order to answer their questions. So they were perceiving it to take longer than it should have normally been. So we were able to come to these conclusions by connecting all of these UX measurements along with other business data to be able to see what the problem is and make proper recommendations to changes. So now that we've had a quick conversation about the benefits and we've talked about the 5 key questions you should be asking yourself when creating a program, I'm going to move on to what to measure. So in the early days of UX was all about usability. We would measure things like error rates, severity of errors, and ask users if it was easy to use. So ease of use was a key metric that was used for a long time. However, times have changed, and we need to recognize that user experience is more than just usability. So over time, the complexity and depth and frequency of our digital interactions increased. Users' interactions have evolved to be much more complex, and so UX has also evolved. It's no longer enough just to be asking, is it easy to use? Now it's far more complex. So today, we know there are 6 key questions that need to be asked. Does it have what users need? Is it easy to use? Does it perform well? Does it know the user? Is it engaging? And is it visually appealing? So after more than 10 years of experience of measuring UX, AnswerLab has defined these 6 questions as being the critical items to measure in a UX program. We define UX as utility, usability, performance, intelligence, engagement, and visual design. So this next slide is going to give you a more detailed definitions of what we mean by all of these. And I'm going to provide examples of a couple of these, a few of these right after this, so just so everybody's aware that there are some examples of these coming up. So utility, what function does your online business fulfill? Are you helping to solve a problem for the user? Usability, this is one we all know. It's easy to use. It's just the ease of use rating. Performance, how fast, stable, and or secure are users perceiving your site? And this is different than analytics data or technical performance data in that it's how people perceive these things, which we all know can be very different from reality. Intelligence, does your site get to know users over time? Was it designed with their needs in mind? Engagement, does your site deliver value for users every time they visit and encourage them to come back? And finally, visual design. Does your site offer interfaces that drive more interaction with users? So there's a few of these that are sometimes a little bit harder for people to understand and for me to describe. So I'm going to give you some examples of these. The first one being utility. This is what function does your online business fulfill is what utility is all about. And Basecamp provides an elegant solution to the well-defined and communicated problem of project management across teams. It takes that chaos inherent in project management from many to-do lists, multiple stakeholders, and multiple deliverables, and helps to organize this chaos. It's fulfilling a unique business need for its users, so it has utility. Amazon is an example of intelligence. Does your site get to know users over time? And this one, while being somewhat simplistic, I think it does represent, what intelligence can be in a site, an example of what it can be. Amazon does a very good job of using shopper data and behavior to understand what new products could be useful and suggesting those at the right time. Here I was looking at a new bike light, and Amazon suggested related bike gear, and it shows me other options that are popular. The suggestions are relevant to me because Amazon is taking into account what a user has bought in the past, what items I put in my shopping cart, items that I've rated or liked, and just what other users have been viewing. It's designed with the user's broader needs in mind, right? Amazon realizes that customers aren't just shopping for an item, they're shopping to fulfill an unmet need. And in this case, it's improvements when riding a bike. So you can take a product and give more life to that and giving users what they really need instead of just one little thing. And that's an example of intelligence. And this is an example of engagement. Does your site deliver value for users every time they visit and encourage them to come back? Now, Food Network is a TV network. They could have just designed the site that was only focused on their TV shows. However, that would that alone drive users to return? Maybe, but by also integrating recipes, restaurants, chef bios, and et cetera, all this other information, they're providing a more engaging experience to the user. It's constantly changing content that encourages visitors to engage and explore through imagining themselves as top chefs, not just a TV viewer. So it's providing an engaging experience for their users. Next, I'm going to shift gears slightly and talk about how to measure. it's important to remember that oftentimes measurement programs like UX measurement programs that we're talking about here are quantitative in nature, and sometimes people think, well, geez, that's quantitative. UX measurements are all quantitative all the time. However, using qualitative research is a great way to complement your quantitative research. And in fact, a leading shipping company does a lot of quantitative and qualitative research. However, they found it very difficult to compare the results and synthesize the findings across all their different research programs. We helped them develop a measurement program that allowed for a set of consistent rating questions that could be used across both quantitative and qualitative research. We literally were asking the same set of UX metrics after each qualitative session and during every quantitative study. And why is this important? It allowed us to have a greater point of reference from one study to the next, and we could relate the findings back to their business goals easier. We could also use the quantitative numbers to help validate the results of those qualitative sessions. So even though the sample sizes are small, you may not have a statistically valid sample, in some cases, but you're able to start getting the benchmarks, if you will, or start to compare things and see how you're doing across both quantitative and qualitative research. So having a consistent UX measurement program allows you to generate research value both from quant to qual and qual to quant. So next, let's move on to determining when to measure. There are three key times when you should be measuring. The first is what we're calling the ongoing pulse. So this is a consistent collection of UX measures to monitor impact of iterative changes, right? It also allows you to more easily see trends in your data, keeping track of how your customers are feeling about their experiences. It also provides a good set of ongoing baseline data at which to compare other types of research. Continuous measurement research tends to be high level, so it's used more for monitoring the health of a site, providing triage, if you will, but it may not always provide you with the ability to give precise diagnostics as to what is wrong. That's why we refer to it as the health or the heartbeat of the site. And I like to use a baseball analogy here when I describe ongoing measurements. Ongoing measurement programs are great for knowing the score of the game or the health of your players, but when that ball is hit, it's flying through the air, you need to understand where to go. And it's not going to necessarily tell you exactly where to stand to catch that ball, but it's giving you a direction as to where to go. Should you be going to left field, right field, or center field to catch that ball? And so it's a great thing to get a high-level view and to get a lot of breadth, if you will, but it may not give you as much depth as you may need. So the other types here, the next one being a consistent time interval. So this one is interesting in that it could replace your ongoing if you need to. We've done that for years where a client, for whatever reason, can't put that code on their website and can't get the intercept to work and have an ongoing measurement program. So instead, they do quarterly testing, and you can use a panel with this instead of an intercept, right? And so there's other reasons why you might want to be using the consistent time intervals. The next one, the final one here, is what we call baseline and retests. So oftentimes you'll want to benchmark a specific experience and then make changes and then retest it. And that allows you to gauge the impact those changes are having. Again, questions with these can be very targeted. You're usually targeting these with a specific experience, and you can go more deeply, if you will, into that experience to get more measurements. So you may have more than just your 6 top-level measurements. Or you may want to be testing a prototype. A prototype, you can use a panel, and before you roll it out, you test it, and then you test it again after you're ready to go with that prototype. So the baseline retest is great for that. We do lots of these. So the other thing to keep in mind is that it could be a combination of these things, right? So you may have regularly scheduled development sprints. So every couple of weeks, you're rolling out new features and functionality or developing new features and functionality. And so you can take and align your testing schedule with those sprint schedules to be able to do a baseline right before you develop something, develop it, and then test it again afterwards, so that you can really get a sense of what that feature is doing. And you're just doing this on an ongoing, rolling basis as you develop more features and functionality. So next, I'd like to talk an example of a client of ours who's been with us for over 10 years, and they came to us with this question: how do we establish accurate measurements with our user experience and the impact UX has on our business? And they had some specific objectives as well. They needed to measure the desktop and mobile experiences. They needed a program to identify site experiences, features, and functions that require their future investment. And they needed to prioritize their digital spend based on investments that will have the greatest impact to their business. So we sat down with them, and we first did step number one of those 5 is to look at the business goals. What are their business goals? And as we learned their business goals, we're able to then start thinking about what metrics we're going to be using with those. So we came up with short-term metrics as well as long-term metrics. And what do I mean by short and long-term metrics? Well, UX metrics themselves are really good at driving change, understanding what is not working on a website, right? And you can make those changes relatively quickly. And so those UX metrics we tend to put in the short-term category. There's brand health, which is long-term. It's hard to move that ship, if you will, when it comes to the brand, right? It takes a longer time. You need to make changes, let those changes sink in with users, and see the brand health over time. And then in between, you have a variety of other metrics, but commonly it's the conversion metrics. Those are things that could be short-term, could be long-term, depending on your metric. So we've bucketed these things into really like 3 different types of metrics. And in the end, we came up with this graphic here that illustrates how we think about these metrics. So on the left, you have conversion index, which is your conversion metric. So on the bottom here, these bullet points, these are literally what some of these metrics were. So likelihood to purchase in the future, likelihood to visit a store, likelihood to recommend or revisit the site in the future. Those are examples of conversion index or conversion metrics. Then you have brand, where we look at the overall brand impression and maybe some adjectives that the company uses to describe their brand, right? And we can measure then how well do people interpret, and are they hitting on those adjectives that the company itself really cares about? And then there's the user experience metrics, and those are the 6 that we just talked about: utility, usability, performance, intelligence, engagement, and visual design. And we also roll in other things like task success, or maybe it's an overall satisfaction, an overall score of what people feel about the website, their experience. And then, so you have these 3 different indices, if you will. You can roll these up into an indice, and then you can start tracking those indices over time. So, as you're measuring this over time, is our conversion going up and down? Is our brand going up and down? Is our user experience going up and down? So you have that level of tracking, but then you can also roll all these up into a composite index, and that composite index is more of that health, that heartbeat, if you will, or that high-level view measurement that you can then use to compare to, say, other competitors, other people in other industries, just to get a sense of where do you fall on that composite score rating. So it's great that we do all of this, and we have all this these indices and things for tracking. They're great for quick snapshots. How's the health of our site doing? But in the end, the goal of this UX measurement programs is, again, to get actionable data. So with this type of a program, you're able to run driver analysis, which is statistical analysis, to determine what are those elements that are driving the most impact or having the most impact on conversion and brand. Right? Because ultimately, what you're trying to do is come up with a set of recommendations, right? You look at all your data, you may have some problems and frustrations, you may have a lot of comments that people are leaving in your data, in your program, and you're looking through and you're reading all of those comments, and you're getting a really good understanding. The other thing that you're doing that we do often is ask people, why are they coming to the site? So then you can target those areas of the site that people care about. And with that, you're making all of these recommendations, right? And it's usually making recommendations. It's usually easy to make a lot of them, but it's hard to know which ones should I prioritize first, right? And there's many ways to do that, but one of the ways that we use here is to look at that impact it's having on conversion and brand. And so that way, once we make all of these the recommendations, we can then take each recommendation and say, which of these does it align with? Which of our UX impact metrics does it align with? And then we can say, okay, this metric will have a high impact on conversion and brand. Well, then let's move it up on the list. But if there's another recommendation that doesn't have a high impact to those, then move it down on the list. So it's a method used to be able to prioritize your recommendations as to what should be changed in the future. And in this case, you can see that middle column there, which is device. And, this client we were doing both desktop and mobile. And so some of the recommendations that we were making may have only applied to one or the other or both of them. And so we take that into account in that driver analysis as well, so that we can understand which of these recommendations are going to have the highest impact. And those are the recommendations that we put forth, and as most important. We may have, with this project, had 20 different recommendations, but we try to prioritize into the top 10, if you will. All right. And finally, the final step in creating a best-in-class UX measurement program is to share your results. Communicating how UX delivers on business priorities is what justifies headcount, budget, and ultimately the proliferation of UX considerations across your organization. So share your results with colleagues to understand how they might benefit from superior UX. So one way you can do this is by socializing the results of your measurement program. There are many ways to do this, and these are just a few examples. But using company gatherings to share results, setting up meetings with smaller teams, creating a repository, and this is one that we see a lot with a lot of our clients, creating repositories of insights that can be easily accessible and shared to the entire company, and leveraging office space by posting images and data in common areas. And I've seen this going on a lot more lately too, where infographics are created that really describe what research was done, who were the participants, what were the goals of those things, and ultimately what was the outcome, what were the findings of that research, and then posting those around the office so people can see that this research is going on. And then finally, incorporating key metrics and goals with specific teams in mind. For example, you may know that the customer support team is looking to improve. They may have not been traditionally in a specific part of your program in the past, and again, this is just an example. But they're looking to improve, and so you can take and incorporate questions related to your customer support area of the site that will allow them to get more engaged with the program. So you're including a metric that may be specific to that area of the site, so that they're more interested and they want to get more engaged. And I'm almost done here, but I'll leave you with this example from a retail client of ours and how their UX team, by improving their UX measurement process. So how did they do it? So a retailer leader came to us because their UX metrics were too broad. They had been using customer satisfaction and revenue. However, having the metrics too broad meant they couldn't easily tie those metrics to the impact of their site changes. So we recommended that they change their model to evaluate those things most important to them, which include awareness, engagement, adoption, retention, and advocacy. This gave the team more credibility in their design and research approaches and decisions by more closely aligning those measurements with the outcomes they desired. And as a result, it elevated the team to be more strategic internal partner within their company. So we've covered a lot in this presentation today. We first talked about why UX metrics are important. We talked about 5 key elements of a UX measurement program, what and when to measure, and then how to share your results. So there was a lot to take in here, and but don't worry, everybody here is going to be getting an email that contains the full report that was created for this, as well as this checklist that you see here that will be helpful for you when setting up your next UX measurement program. So now I'd like to open it up for questions, if you will.
Hi, Ryan. Thanks for that. I'm seeing some questions come in through the Q&A panel. I also got some directly through the chat, so I'm just going to go ahead and read those, make it a little easier. Ryan, first question here, with baseline and retest, do you test the same users? And if so, how do you avoid survey assessment fatigue with user testers?
You may or may not use the exact same users, right? Most often there's a profile that you're going after. So a quantitative research, you're usually looking at profiles and possibly doing a panel. And so yeah, you want to try to keep that panel, the segments of users that you're talking about the same throughout each one. Now, is it the exact same person each time? Maybe, depending on the goals of your research, but most often it's usually just get that profile of the user, make sure it's the same as before and after.
Great, thank you. Another question here from the chat panel. This is about the UX measures. Okay, so I work for a financial services company. Not all of the measures apply equally on my sites. Should we weight those, cut them out? What do you recommend?
So that's a great question. When you're talking about those six UX metrics, it's inevitable that some of them may apply more to, you may get lower scores depending on your site, right? The type of site that you are. For example, if you're a banking site focused on bill pay in itself is more utilitarian, right? So you would expect to get a higher rating on utility, but you may be slightly lower on engagement, right? Because you don't necessarily need to engage users like a retailer does, but what you're trying to do is provide that utilitarian service to get them through a process very quickly. Retailers, on the other hand, they may be more inclined to have a higher engagement because it's engaging to look at products or to read about things, read reviews, whatever those things are. But then utility may or may not be, if you focus in on the checkout process, then the utilitarian nature of that checkout process may not be as high in engagement, but the site on a whole should even itself out over across all those different measures.
Great, thank you. Another question, when we start measuring, how do I know what's a good score and what's a bad score?
Yeah, that gets at, essentially you're getting at benchmarking, right? So with that question, I would say you want to use a consistent set of rating scales, and it's important to understand really what's the goal of the research, right? Is it to benchmark yourself against a competitor? Is it, or an industry? Or is it important to really drive changes on your site and get the impact and measure what those changes are having on your website, so and learn how people think about your website enough to make changes to your website? Because that's a fundamental question I think that's important to first answer. The way we do it, we're really looking at measurements. Take a measurement, benchmark it, and see how it changes over time, right? And I think that's a great way to do it, especially if you're looking for, is the changes that you're making on your site having an impact to these metrics. So let me think what else there is on that one. The other thing to keep in mind is that it also depends on what you're measuring, in that oftentimes measurement programs themselves might be very high level, right? How's the site overall doing? But most of the time, I would say executives care about that a whole lot, but most of the time people are caring more about their specific area of a website, right? And it's a very interesting dilemma there, right? Because you can take an overall number and compare it across industries or across competitors. But what you really want to know is how is the area of my area? I own this area of the site. How is it doing? And so by using this sort of a benchmark it and then continually monitor it process, you're able to narrow that down to specific areas, which a lot of benchmarking programs and third-party benchmarking sites and stuff, they may not get to measure that area that you care about. So you're able to customize it much more to your needs versus just a high swapping. How are we doing against our competitors? Because you really care about something fundamentally different than what's actually being measured.
Great, thanks, Ryan. We're running up on time here. I've got one more question. For quantitative research, which are the best ways to measure usability, i.e. User satisfaction, efficiency, effectiveness, et cetera, for mobile?
So can you repeat that question?
I sure can. With quantitative research, which are the best ways to measure usability for mobile? And the examples are things like user satisfaction, efficiency, effectiveness.
Well, yeah, I mean, mobile, we all make I'd say in the past 5 years to 10 years, somewhere in there, mobile has come on board, and we make a big deal about mobile. But fundamentally, mobile experience is really not much different in how you measure that than you do with the desktop. So from that perspective, I would say using these metrics that we've talked about here still apply. They still need to be have utility. They still need to have engagement intelligence and visual design, right? So taking those measurements and applying it to both the desktop and the mobile is very applicable. And so the idea here is that you want to create a set of metrics that will be used across both mobile and desktop so that you can compare those two and understand how is the experience on one versus the other. So hopefully I answered that question as it was asked. But
great, thanks, Ryan. And we are just at time now, so I thank you for your presentation, Ryan. Thanks everyone who joined us. We did have a bunch of questions that we couldn't get to, so please, if we couldn't get to your question and it's not answered in the follow-up email information that we send out, feel free to reach out at info@answerlab.com. We'd be happy to continue the discussion offline or via email, I guess, as the case may be. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the day. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.